This week, Gretchen Anthony, author of The Kids Are Gonna Ask, talks about what lies behind a lot of her writing.
I think that's what family is, right? Family is a compilation of history and stories, and it's those stories that bring us together.
Welcome to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline. I'm your host, Monica Hadley, and at the other end of the line is my mother, Caroline Kilborn. Hi, Mom.
Hi. Well, it's still hot today, but cooler days are coming.
We sure hope so. We had that beautiful, period of time that didn't last long enough when it was just so nice outside. And now we got back to the hot, humid Iowa weather that they say makes the corn grow. Of course, the storm flattened half the corn, so.
Oh, I know.
And we haven't had any rain since.
Not since then. No.
Yeah, and we didn't get that much here. We actually missed the ill effects of the derecho. All we got was a really cool storm, but 50 miles away, it was pretty bad.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So, what do we have today?
Today we have a very interesting book. It's the title of which is The Kids Are Gonna Ask, and it's by Gretchen Anthony. And Gretchen, excuse me, is the author of Evergreen Tidings from the Baumgartners, which is a Midwest Connections pick, and a Best Books pick by Amazon, BookPub, Pop Sugar, and the New York Post. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post, Medium, and The Bright Life, among others. She lives in Minneapolis with her family. She lives where it's cool. Okay.
Welcome to Writers' Voices, Gretchen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So are we, and it's nice you're a neighboring Midwesterner.
I am born and bred in Minnesota. Yeah, I can tell. Understand all the corn comments.
And I can hear the little bit of the Minnesota accent.
Oh, you break my heart saying that. I grew up in Minnesota and then moved away for almost 20 years and shed my accent, swore I was never going to come back. And then, of course, I came back because all Minnesotans eventually come back.
Yep. It's kind of like Fairfield, Iowa, which is where I am. People leave, but they always seem to come back.
Yep. My husband has a theory that Minnesotans, particularly Minnesota women, hear the siren call and they eventually answer. We all know.
That's a good one.
So The Kids Are Gonna Ask is also set in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Primarily, although it's got a few other locations as well.
Yeah, no, I love to set my books in Minnesota. There's something that I find so unique about the people here and the culture, and we're so quirky. We're deserving of books.
That's a great line. So tell us a little bit about how this book came to be. Where'd you get the idea?
This book came out of sheer panic. I had a 2-book deal with my publisher, and we had finished up and published Evergreen Tidings from the Baumgartners, and I had an entirely different novel in the works, and I think I wrote about 200 pages of it, and started working through it with my editor just to make sure this was the book we were going to go forward with, and oh man, after about 2 weeks, she just said, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think this is your next book. And I had to agree with her. Yeah, but especially it being my second book and coming out of the corporate world, I was looking at the deadline that was on my contract and thinking, oh my gosh, I am never going to meet this deadline, given that we just dumped my entire next book. So I remember having this moment of just like, I was on the couch and I just told my brain, you have got to come up with something. and at the time, sadly enough, at the time, the shooting in Parkland, Florida had just happened at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. And we were it was, a week or so into the aftermath where a number of the students there rose up and they said, we are taking over the gun debate from adults because we don't feel like you're solving this. And immediately there were camps that formed in response to these kids standing up and taking a stand. And on the one hand, there were people who just celebrated their bravery and wanted to support them. And then on the other hand, there was a large camp that, and very vocal camp that really attacked these kids. And the mother in me responded emotionally almost immediately. And I just thought, if, these kids are barely 18, if that, and if we can so easily attack children, what other topics would get us that riled up? In this circumstance, it was gun control. But I just wondered what else would get us so ignited as a culture that we'd be willing to attack children. And this book became my answer. Sex will get us riled up.
And not only attack children, but kids who had just lived through the worst possible nightmare and are responding to that and are basically being told, shut up, you don't get to have a voice.
Yep. And really vulnerable. I mean, traumatized children. Yeah.
Yeah.
And these kids, Thomas and Savannah McClare, are traumatized in their own way. They lose their mother when the book opens. They're 17 years old, but they lose their mother in a just tragic traffic accident when they're 13. And they've always lived with their grandmother and their mother, but when their mother is gone, it's just their grandmother, and all the information that the mother never told them about who their father was or how they came to be went with her. And it became a puzzle that they had to solve. So
that's the premise of The Kids Are Gonna Ask.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's a lot more to the story than that.
Yeah. Yeah. The book is, one of the things I loved about writing this book is that the pitch is so easy to summarize. It's 17-year-old twins who start a podcast to find their biological father who they never knew. And the podcast goes viral and their lives get turned upside down in the process. And I think that's a fair summary. Some of the things are wonderful that they find, and some of the things that they find as a result are really, really upsetting and tough.
As I was reading and there was this segment of the listening population who started attacking them for possibly upsetting their unknown father's life and what about his rights and so forth. And to be honest, I had a little bit of like, would people really do that? But when you talk about what happened with Parkland, I guess they really would.
They really would, yeah, because there are so many underlying. I had sort of a reaction to like that as I was writing that. I thought, okay, where is the line that I've taken this too far, taken it into a farce? Because I really didn't want to write a farce. I started peeling back the layers, and it's not just a question of paternity or sex or extramarital affairs. It's a question, it's really a question of privacy and fear. I think people most often are responding. The issues we get really riled up about are often symptomatic of nothing more than our fear of losing control over a situation. And privacy is, again, at its base, is fear of losing control over the things that we don't want known about us.
Right. But, yeah. But, Mom, what do you think about this? This is a whole new world, isn't it?
It is. Oh, gosh. It really is. Of course, they have all these things on TV about, DNA and finding your roots and all this stuff, and I'm going, oh, gosh. I pretty well know where I'm from, so I'm not going to get into that. But, there are a lot of people who don't know where they're from.
Yeah.
And don't know about their past. And so I can understand how they're drawn into that. I really can.
Well, we actually have a pretty good family story, not close family, but of, with Aunt Lucille and her son and her grandchild. You want to tell that story?
Oh, you go ahead and tell that story.
Well, this is my grandmother's cousin, who we all called Aunt Lucille, and she was quite a character, and I just adored her. She was a tough woman. She was a career woman from a very early age. She told me one time, she had married a man that I assume she loved, but he was really pretty good for nothing, and alcoholic. He was not. I shouldn't judge. He had an illness. So she worked. She was the county assessor. County auditor.
Oh, yeah, no. Auditor. I can't remember.
Well, one of the two. Yeah.
Yeah, worked at the courthouse her whole life.
Her whole life. And she hadn't had any children, and then fairly late in life, in her 40s, I believe, and this would have been in the 40s probably, she had a son. And everyone immediately thought she would quit work because she was a mom now, but she knew that wasn't even really a possibility, but she didn't talk about that publicly. And so she told me this story about even her doctor and her boss thinking she would quit, but she didn't. She kept working. Anyway, she had this one son, and he never married. And many, many years later, when Lucille must have been, in her maybe 80?
She was almost, I think she was 100 when she died.
Okay, so sometime in her 80s, a girl found her son and said, "I think you're my dad." And turned out when he was in the Army, which would have been the late 50s or something like that, that he had fathered this child, never knew about it, and the whole family was thrilled to find her.
Oh, that's a wonderful ending.
Yeah, it is. Especially Lucille, because she had a granddaughter now, and I think maybe even great-grandchildren that she never thought she would get to have. So it was really very touching.
Yes. Oh, can you hear the relief in my voice?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, what if the story had ended otherwise? I don't think I would have told it.
Well, because so many of us don't.
Yeah.
And I can understand all the emotion that goes into that, but it's not the child's fault.
No.
One of the things that I decided to do in this book, and I love that you told a story about family, is that Savannah, the girl, she is adamant from the beginning that she does not want to discover her father through a DNA test. They agree to do a DNA test at the very end to confirm. But she is adamant from the beginning, like I said, that she wants to learn the stories of where she came from. She wants to learn more about her mother. She wants to learn more about how they met, or the circumstances of how they met, or she and her brother may have come to be. And so she refuses to take that shortcut. And I think that's what family is, right? Family is a compilation of history and stories, and it's those stories that bring us together. And I just always loved that about her character. She wanted to know the stories. It wasn't the bloodline that she wanted. She wanted to really understand who her people were.
Exactly. Another interesting aspect of the book, I think, is that you have these twins, 17-year-old twins, and I think many of us have this idea that twins are always very connected, but these two really aren't getting along all that well.
Yeah. They're at that time in their lives where they just really they're trying so desperately to find themselves and their personalities and distinguish themselves from each other as well.
Right. Do you have any experience with twins?
Well, I don't have twins, and I am not a twin. But I had friends who were twins growing up, and we have family who have twins, and I have good friends who have twins. And that's the number one thing that they all say right away is they were born together, but they are their own people through and through from the beginning.
Right. So when you set out to write The Kids Are Going to Ask, Did you know how the story was going to end once you got this idea out of desperation? Yeah.
Well, I figured I knew how things were, what the results of their search for their father would be. I did know that, and I'll try not to give a spoiler on that. But I also was aware of, but had to figure out over the process of writing this, that answer was only the beginning in a lot of ways. Everything that comes as a result of that in terms of like emotions it brings up and decisions that you have to make, and then, where does your life go from here? I knew that was actually going to be a huge part of the story, and that I couldn't plan until I felt immersed in the front half of the story, until I really knew these kids and what was going to happen from there on out. So not necessarily the ending, but I knew the basic arc. Yeah. And also I tried to, one of my biggest concerns in writing this story was accurately capturing the experience of searching for family, searching for history and biology, and with the knowledge that no two searches or experiences are alike. And so I knew I couldn't capture a universal experience, but I also wanted to be true to whatever emotions and fears and joys were universal to that. I wanted to make sure that those at least got into the McClare story. And so I did an awful lot along the way, and especially at the beginning, I did an awful lot of interviewing people who had gone through searches. And some had decided not to search. They were adopted or came from atypical family backgrounds and decided not to search. And I consider that as valid a decision as to search. And I'm so glad I did this. I had sensitivity readers after I got the draft together who had gone through searches themselves, who, read the story as a whole or portions of the story and told me where I was off or, what was resonating. So.
Excellent.
That was good, yeah.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guest today is Gretchen Anthony, author of The Kids Are Gonna Ask. I actually have a friend and two acquaintances who had given up babies for adoption in the 60s, and who later did come and find them. And,
wow.
And they were all thrilled about it.
Oh, yeah. Yay.
Yeah.
Wait, who came and their kids came and found the mothers? Or?
Yes, the kids came and found the kids searched and found the mothers, and
wonderful.
They were all thrilled about it. So.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. Yeah. There are some really tough stories out there, I have to say.
Oh gosh, yes.
About, either finding what you wanted to find, but maybe finding it too late, or not being welcome, or, it's just.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, every story is going to have a different ending.
Yep. Yep. Every story. Yeah. And that's why we writers short material.
So, what was wrong with the book that you gave up on?
Oh. My editor called it something like, it's just yet another book about a woman who owns a cafe having a midlife crisis.
Oh.
And I thought to myself, is that a genre? I didn't know that was a genre.
Yeah, I think it is. But they're usually on Lifetime movies.
Yeah, I suppose. So, and she was right. I really do appreciate my editor, Natalie Halleck, an awful lot. She's so smart. And, yeah, she was right. She was right in that moment. I won't give the premise of that book away, but I still love the premise, and I am going to use it someday, but just not as another book about a midlife woman or middle-aged woman having a midlife crisis.
Yeah. Although sometimes it's not a cafe, it can be a bakery.
Yeah, it's usually a bakery, I think. Well, this one was a pie shop.
Oh, okay, okay.
Apples to apples, you know.
Well, Gretchen, why don't you read a little bit from The Kids Are Gonna Ask?
I would love to. So, I thought that I would just start in the first chapter. There's a prologue, but I'm going to start in the first chapter. And the book is actually written from 4 perspectives. There's Maggie and Thomas McClare and Savannah McClare, the 2 twins. And Maggie is their grandmother. And then there's a fourth perspective, but I won't give that away. Yeah. And I like this section because this is one of the only sections that you get to meet the people who Maggie and Savannah and Thomas have lost. Bess, their mother, and George, their grandmother. And these people are present throughout the book as voices, really, in Maggie's head. She still talks to them every day and asks them, you know, sort of wishes that they were still around. She lives with ghosts, so to speak. But in this chapter, you actually get to meet them. So this is chapter 1. If every home has a heart, my family's beats at our dining room table. Broad, sturdy, and claw-footed, it has been the McClare family gathering place for more than 120 years. My great-grandmother was a baby at that table. She learned to pray there and keep her hands in her lap and listen more than she spoke. Later, when my grandmother became a mother, she painted the bland maple wood a vibrant red, and in a quiet act of rebellion told her daughter, "Growing up, I was told that men carried the conversation and women carried the dishes. We're going to do things differently." Many years after that, when my mother brought the table into our house, she repainted it, but kept the striking color. "Brown would match the cupboards better," I suggested. My mother shook her head. "We keep it red for a reason," she told me. "It's a reminder that everyone has a voice, and every voice deserves a place at the table." Written by Elizabeth Bess McClare, excerpt, college entrance essay. The day her family's lives would change forever, Maggie McClare passed through the door from the kitchen and glanced at the dining room wall. Wouldn't you know? Bess's essay was crooked again. She walked over and ran a finger down the side of the glass-framed paper, nudging its corners into a perfect 90 degrees. There. In Maggie's mind, Bess laughed. "Really, Mom, it was only slanted a few degrees. You couldn't let that be." "Oh, you hush," Maggie scolded. But she was smiling. She continued on her way to retrieve the mail from the front door mail slot. Maggie loved her house and everything in it. A classic example of Italian architecture on Lake of the Isles Parkway in Minneapolis, the McClare house was a Fitzgerald-esque treasure, a Gatsby among its peers. Windows tiled like dominoes across the front, living room to dining room. The wooden floors creaked. There was a sunroom circled by lead glass windows and hallways lined with heavy oak doors and brass doorknobs exhibiting the wear of generations. Only the kitchen had changed, and that, with its new appliances and upgraded sink, was merely a facelift on the house's roaring 20s aesthetic. The dining room, though, was by far Maggie's favorite. More than any other place in the house, it's where her memories lived. She thought back to the day, 20-some years ago, she'd hung Bess's essay there. "I can't believe you," Beth had scoffed, Maggie being an infinite source of amusement to her daughter. "It's not like I'm Harper Lee or something." She watched her mother ascend the worn stepladder, hammer in hand. "You wrote a beautiful testament to our values," Maggie explained, "and I love it." She drove a nail into the plaster with a swift 1-2. George had been there too, before he was only a memory back when his heart was still pumping and he could stand as he always did, with his feet wide and his hands on his hips. I think it's terrific, he'd said. It's a reminder about the importance of family. Like I always say, he thrust a declarative finger in the air. We McClares will always have enough. Bess groaned, but chimed in anyway, joining her father for the chorus. Because we have each other.
And that was Gretchen Anthony reading from The Kids Are Gonna Ask. So, podcast. Yeah, so the kids have a podcast. It's kind of an unusual one where their grandmother invites odd people to dinner and they interview them. Where did that come from?
Well, I am a huge podcast fan. So the idea that I would center a book around a podcast was not a stretch for me. And so that wasn't hard. The idea, or the question really became, okay, well, if you're going to center a book around a podcast, it has to be a pretty interesting podcast. So what's that going to be? And I knew that the search for their biological father would be interesting enough to center a book around, but I couldn't figure out just how they would get discovered. And Maggie as a character is very much based off of my mother. I describe Maggie often as a lonely extrovert because she's a people gatherer. She loves to have people around, and yet the last several years of her life have been dedicated solely to raising these kids. And so, but one of the things that she's always done her entire life is, as an extrovert, she's fascinated by people, and she meets these people everywhere. And her husband, George, was a people gatherer too. And they used to have these dinner salons where they would just invite these fascinating people to dinner. And that is my mother, and in a lot of ways was also my father. I would come home sometimes and I'd walk in the door and I'd be like, who is this person? There was always like people coming in and out of our house, and my parents may have known them. They'd say, oh, you remember so and so from so and so, and I no, I have no idea. They, and my dad was a pastor, and so they had moved around a fair bit. And so they knew people from everywhere, and just, our house, and I think among friends, our house just sort of became known as, oh, you can always pop by there. They're always happy to see you, so that was
always have a pot of coffee on.
Always had the coffee on.
And when you walked in the door, that's the first thing that you want a cup of coffee?
Exactly. So that was my childhood.
Yes. I knew some families like that.
Yeah. And little did I know at the time, it was just basically preparing me for a writer's life. I was gathering, stories and characters as I went.
I've always been attracted to the concept of the salon. Ever since I read about, in Paris in the 20s, where they'd have these salons and you'd gather all these wonderful people and there's every now and then you hear, like, if you were to have like 5 people from throughout history to have dinner together, who would you pick? And stimulating conversation and good food and wine, and now in the age of COVID, that seems like a pipe dream.
It does. Yeah, it does, like so many other things. So, and I always get excited when I hear that people actually do have these salons.
I know. Have you ever been to one?
I've never been invited to one.
Me neither.
I'll put that on my bucket list.
Maybe we need to get together and have one.
Yes, I'd pick up for that. But in the meantime, I have discovered a number of podcasts that are similar to the McClare Dinner Salon, which is what they called their little mini podcast that ends up helping them get discovered. There are several podcasts like that. Some of them are just, you wouldn't know the names of the people that they invite to dinner, but they turn into fun conversation. But then some of them are, they invite these big name people to dinner, and they have a roaring time for, 90 minutes or so.
Oh, that sounds fun. Now,
Yeah.
speaking of podcasts, you have something of your own. Not exactly a podcast, but in that same vein, a book club.
I do. I have a book club. It's called the Gretchen. It's called the Just Gotta Laugh Book Club. Gretchen Anthony's Just Gotta Laugh Book Club, and it's on my Facebook page. Basically, it's I started it during the initial lockdown, and I just needed a creative outlet, and I needed to connect with people. And what better way to do that but around books, especially books. I felt such a need at the time for books that brought some sort of light to your mood, or, made you laugh, or lightened the burden that we've been carrying ever since. And so now I have just finished the lineup for season 2, and I'm cutting down. I used to do it weekly, but I'm cutting down to once a month, and I'm publishing all 9 of putting out the names of all 9 of the books. I'm actually releasing them next week, so that people can read them in advance, and then I get the author, and just like you're doing here, I get the author, and we chat for 40 minutes on Facebook Live about their book, and people chime in with their questions on Facebook Live. They type them in, and it has been so much fun. Yeah.
Well, that's a great way to do it. From the beginning, we've been doing Writers' Voices since 2006. We've done a new show almost every week. Originally, it was live on a local radio station. And now we record, and we're on 2 radio stations and also on iTunes.
I love that.
Yeah, and our own website, which is writersvoices.com. And so we've done over 500 shows.
Yeah, I was scrolling through, and it was like an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, and I had often thought it would be fun to do something like a book club too. But wasn't quite sure how to make it happen technically. But the idea of doing it on Facebook Live and having people type in the questions is great. Or nowadays with Zoom,
yep,
it might be possible to do something that way too.
Yeah. There's, I actually record on Zoom, and it broadcasts live to Facebook Live. But Facebook Live is like the tool, it's like the town square that everyone can find, and then they have the access to. Yeah.
Yep.
So, well, you are welcome to join our podcast anytime, any month.
That would be fun.
Yeah. And then we have I call it the Book Clubbers Clubhouse. So there's a private group on my Facebook page too that you can join if you want to chat about the books in between, or get sneak peeks, or suggest books. Just chat with other book clubbers. So it's on my Facebook page, which is GretchenAnthony.writer, or you can go to my website, and it's all there as well, which is GretchenAnthony.com.
Right. And Mom, you can even do it now that you have Facebook.
Oh, don't get me going on something else.
Mom she was a little bit of a latecomer to Facebook, but she's making up for lost time.
Well, good for you. Yeah, we'd love to have you. It's funny. My mom, every week, she's gotten the hang of it now, but every week she would email me just before, and she'd say, okay, tell me again, can you send me the link? How do I get on? So she was very faithful, though. She always got on.
Oh, very good. Very good. So, how do you choose books?
Oh, for the book club?
Yes.
Well, last season, what I'm calling the first season, it was a little bit by the seat of the pants. It was either something that I was reading and loved, or had read, or it was author friends that I could, twist their arms and say, hey, come on my book club. Now, this season, with a little bit of advanced planning, I've been able to broadened what we're reading a little bit, because one of the, last season we were reading things that would stereotypically you would think of as humorous, either just, general fiction with a humorous twist or humorous essays. For example, we had Helen Ellis on to read, after we read Southern Lady Code, which is it's one of my all-time favorite book of essays. She's just hysterical. But this season, what I discovered was a bit of a shortcoming, was that there are so many people who are witty and wonderful humorists in their own right who are writing across multiple genres. So there's of course rom-com, but there are so many crime and detective writers who are wonderfully witty in their own right. So for example, in October, we're reading a crime novel by, I'm going to blank on the author's name, so I'm not even going to try and say it. Oh, actually, yeah. So that'll be good. I just figured something a little bit haunting for
Halloween. Sure.
Yeah, for October. And then I call in a lot of favors. So probably the same way that you choose yours. In the long run, they should be witty, or they should make us discover good people, or make us feel just a little bit better when we close the cover.
Well, we get a lot of submissions from publicists, and so I just try and sometimes if the publicist is persistent, I'll say yes without even looking at on a book that I might not have done otherwise.
Yeah.
So most of the time I don't know too much about the books or the authors ahead of time, and they're all new releases. Are your books that you're doing on your book club necessarily new releases, or are they not always?
Mix.
Yeah.
There's a mix. Yeah. Because it's a book club and we discuss the book with the author.
Right.
If it's a new release, I always give it at least a month after it's released so that people have time to read it.
That's a very good point. Now, are funny writers necessarily funny in person?
Fingers crossed so far. We've had really good luck. I like to say though too, I try and ask as little as possible for my guests. I try, they're coming on, they're being gracious and coming on to answer our questions. So I try and make it an easy lift for them.
Yes,
I try and do all the hard work. Yeah. You know that as a host.
Yes, of course. Although I will say that most of our guests make it pretty easy for us too.
Good.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline and Gretchen Anthony, the author of The Kids Are Gonna Ask. So there's a couple of other things that I want to ask you about, but one is I did look at your website, and there's a spread at the bottom of Instagram posts, and really you like dark chocolate Oreos better than the old-fashioned ones?
I don't know if I would say I like them better, but my son discovered them at the grocery store and brought them home. And I had this immediate, every once in a while you'll have this sensory memory. I love sensory memories, when you smell something and it brings you back or whatever. But eating, it's like a double chocolate Oreo, and it's the dark chocolate in the middle. And I'm not even a big dark chocolate fan. But when I bit into it, I had this sensory memory of Halloween, and that's what I posted on Instagram. I said, if Halloween has a flavor, these are it. Yeah.
Well, my daughter has tried every single flavor of Oreos that they make, and I'll have to ask her sometime to make a list of which ones are the best. She also does blind taste tests for friends, both on Oreo flavors, and I think it's some kind of chip. It might be Dorito, or it might be Pringles. I think Pringles does all these weird flavors. So she does these blind taste tests to see if people can tell what they are.
I love it.
Yeah. She's really into flavors.
Does she have like an Instagram or a TikTok where she does the challenges?
No, she should.
That would be a hit, I bet.
Yeah, I bet it would too. So how did you talked about coming from a corporate background and having a lot of deadlines. So how did you get into writing?
Well, I guess, I just snorted. Nah. That's a good laugh when you snort in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I was in corporate communication and management consulting for a long time. And so I was always writing in the midst of that. So, in one of the things that I got known for over the course of my career was writing for executives, writing in other people's voices. Because, when you're working somewhere, or even if you get, a letter that's written in a CEO's name from a company, it's never the CEO who's written that. It's a member of the CEO's team who's written that in their voice, or in a voice that's meant to elicit, whatever mood or sentiment they're trying to express. And I got really good at that. And about 20 some years into my career, I was the director of communication for a company that we laid off like 20% of the workforce, and I was among them. So I got to handle the communications for my own layoff. And at the very end of it, I had loved that job until I didn't love it. At the very end, I was done. And as a part of my package, I was lucky enough to get lined up with an executive recruiter and an executive job coach who, just helps you figure out what your next step is. And he took one look at my resume and I said, I feel like it's scattered, like it's all over the place. And he said, actually, it reads like chapters. I feel like you've treated your career in a good way. Like everything is a chapter. And once you reach the end of that challenge, you're done with it and you move on to another challenge. And it was such an aha moment for me, because I said, I don't think I want to be in corporate communications anymore. I think I've done every challenge there that I want to do. And he said, all right, good to know. Then what's next? And I told him that I had been writing in my career for 20 some years, but I had all these books that I had started and maybe weren't going anywhere or whatever. And I said, I'm not going to feel settled if I get into the sunset of my life and I haven't published a book. And he said, well, better get working. And that's where I went. Yeah, I just got working. I paid the bills as a ghostwriter for a long time because I had developed that skill of writing for executives and doctors and, brands. So I was able to do that as a freelancer to cover the bills while I worked on establishing my fiction career. And that was really one of those moments that I feel really lucky to have had.
Wow. So did you, how long did it take then from that point till you finished your first publishable book?
Yeah. So that conversation happened in 2013. And my first book was published in October of 2018. So it was about a 5-year journey, and in that I wrote a whole other book that I took through master classes and, courses online. I really threw myself into it. I became a student of fiction and of the publishing process. And, that first book, I remember I was in a novel writing master class, and my teacher read it and she said, her feedback was, okay, this is the book here's what I want you to do with it. I want you to take it and put it in your desk drawer and close the door and then start your next book. And at first I could have been so offended by that.
You're laughing now, but that must have hurt.
Not, a little bit, except I liked her so much as a teacher. And her point was, and she may have even said as much, this is your learning novel. You took everything from this novel that you needed to learn, and you're ready to move on to your next one. And she was right. She was absolutely right. And so it was actually, again, the perfect advice.
And there are
that next book became The Baumgartners.
There are quite a few of the authors that we've talked to over the years who have those first novels in the drawer somewhere. And sometimes it's more than one. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 until they realized that they were actually ready to write for publication. And you know the story about Ernest Hemingway losing all of his earlier writing?
I don't think I know that story.
Okay. So he was, might have been in Spain, but his wife, Hadley, was coming to meet him, and she decided to surprise him by bringing all of his manuscripts with her. And because she was still in Paris and he was somewhere else. So she's going to see him. She puts them all in this little suitcase. She gets on the train. No. It stops at a place. She gets off to get a sandwich. She comes back and the suitcase is gone.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And it probably was the beginning of the end of their marriage. But some critics say that without that, he may not have been the writer that he was, because he was starting to have some success. He was getting responses. He had a few pieces out for submission, so he didn't lose everything. And of course, this was back in the day where photocopies didn't exist, right. And it was a real effort to make a copy of a manuscript. And so in many cases, it was his only copy. So he rewrote some of those things, but better, probably, than they were to begin with. And some things he never went back and redid. And so he was able to throw away all his earlier work without actually doing it intentionally.
Huh.
Yeah.
I had not heard that story, but it makes so much sense. Being a Minnesotan, Fitzgerald is our hometown boy, and he grew up in St. Paul and then came back. And when he was wanting to marry Zelda, she, of course, was from a pretty wealthy Southern family. And by that point, his dad never did very well. And he was living with his parents in an apartment in St. Paul. His grandmother had a fair bit of money, but not his family. And he wanted to marry Zelda, and she said, "I will not marry you until you can prove you're a success." He went into his bedroom and he wrote his first novel, This Side of Paradise, in like a month or a summer. And his mother used to drop sandwiches at the door. He wouldn't come out. He, turned away all of his friends who would come to visit. And that story as a writer has haunted me, because I always think, how could he have gotten that right? I rely on my rewrites and my, I very much the Hemingway model more than the Fitzgerald model. You know what I mean? How could he have gotten that right?
Yeah.
But somehow
I'm old enough that when I started writing, it was on paper, and then you typed it up you typed up your stories on a typewriter and sent them out with a self-addressed stamped envelope. And then not too long after that, the first computers came along, and so you could, but there wasn't email yet, so you still had to print them out and to send anything out, and everything went by mail, of course. But the editing process is, of course, so much easier now. It's so much easier to do multiple drafts.
Yeah.
But because it's so easy, I think maybe the expectations of perfection are higher, and so it takes just as long, maybe, because people keep going and going and going, whereas maybe in an earlier time they would have stopped sooner, because it's, every time you type a new draft, it's a huge amount of work. And being over-edited maybe isn't always a good thing.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if I could write as beautifully as Fitzgerald
on the first draft.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right. Yeah. It has most certainly changed expectations and therefore style and output.
So, Gretchen, how did you find your publisher?
I went through, I did my homework and I went through the traditional, channels. So I solicited agents, and somewhere along the, I took a ton of classes. I was the very good student and did all my homework on just figuring out what this process looked like. And somewhere along the way, I had read a statistic that you don't have to worry about getting rejected by agents until you get to about 60 rejections. So I made a spreadsheet of every agent that I had sent it out to, and when I sent it out and how long they would, often in their submission guidelines, they'll tell you how long it usually takes them to respond. And I think I got into the 20s, and my agent, Holly Root is who my agent is now, emailed out of the blue and she said, "Let's talk. I love your book." And I thought, wow, I didn't get anywhere near 60.
Wow. So you were, didn't quite reach your goal there.
No, I didn't. I never got to the point where I had to worry. Although getting 20 some rejections, is still not fun, but I had prepared myself as best I could. And having been in, a writer in a corporate setting for so long, one of the best things about that, besides, learning to write in other people's voices and therefore characters, was just learning to take feedback without getting bent out of shape. I mean, I can take edits and feedback now. Just, I don't know what it would have been like to have been so early in my career and I had to learn that. It's never fun to get 20 some rejections, but at the same time I thought, okay, this is part of the process. This is what happens. And then, my agent submitted them to all the publishing houses. And it's funny, I remember getting her list of the publishing houses that she was sending out to. And I took one look at it, and I actually had to email my best friend immediately and show her the list. And I was shocked. I said, these are like real publishers. I had it so in my head that they were going to be just tiny, tiny little publishing houses or something. And my friend, thank goodness, was just like, yeah.
And you actually are being published by HarperCollins.
Yeah.
Which, they're a real publisher for sure. Now, did you work with the editor there very much? Or was your book pretty well edited by the time they got it?
Yeah, no. I had done several, edits, but she had some really great feedback and vision for the Evergreen Tidings for the Baumgartners was my first book. So we worked through that I don't know if I would say quite a bit, but we made some substantial changes to it, and I'm really happy with the way it came out. And then, bless Natalie's heart, she basically went into therapy sessions with me off and on. The kids are going to ask. It was really a challenge to get to the emotional core for these kids, while at the same time keeping the book moving. It's a really tough balance, and we went through a ton of revisions on this one. I'm happy with how it came out, but it was certainly a challenge.
I tell you, this can get so involved, this whole thing. So many different aspects to it, especially this podcast. I mean, isn't that something? Are other people really doing that to find parents, or is that something that is just in this book?
I haven't come across. There are a lot of podcasts about people's experiences, like there's a support community. I mean, you can go to websites and you go to online forums and Facebook groups and things, but there's also a support community that comes across in podcasts. But that's really about the process or people's experiences or, questions and answers type thing. What I have not found is a public search in a podcast form. However, there are quite a number of them that you can find, for example, on Facebook. People do searches very publicly on Facebook often, or in certain forums often. I had found a number of websites where people publish what they know and ask for help. So there may be a podcast that I haven't found yet, but it definitely is being done in other public ways. Yeah.
Right. And I think there's people using podcasts like to try and solve unsolved crimes.
Definitely. Yeah. There's a lot of that.
It would be kind of similar to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because at its heart, this is a mystery in a lot of ways.
Right. So, Gretchen, you said you got a 2-book deal. Isn't that pretty unusual for a debut novelist?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. Now that I'm in the process of pitching my next books, I keep thinking, wouldn't it have been great to get a 3-book deal? But, everything is just another notch in the experience, in the timeline. And we're actually getting really close to what the next book will look like. The exciting news too is that I have a audio only book coming out I don't have an exact date, but it's, I am working with Audible Originals to create an Audible original. It's a novella, so it's only about a quarter of the size of one of my full novels, but that one is called Meditations with Mia Blue. And it's about a celebrity wellness guru. She's a very well-known, person who preaches health and wellness. And it turns out that her life is not nearly as perfect as she would have you believe, as she would love her public image to show. So that is going to be coming out either fall or there's been some talk of early in the year, sort of new year, new you type of thing. So that'll be on Audible. So that'll be audiobook only, but that's been really fun to do as well.
Now, some of the Audible originals are kind of produced. They have multiple actors reading parts. Is that the case with this, or is it just a single reader?
It's still in early production design, but the idea right now is to have a couple different, Mia Blue, this wellness guru, she does these daily meditations on the app that she has, the wellness app. And so she'll be reading those. Majority of the story is told through her. But then there's like a celebrity gossip person who does these daily or hourly videos on Instagram TV, who does celebrity gossip on there. And that's a male. And they're talking about having different narrators for that because they're quite different personalities and it's quite different tone.
Well, I'll look forward to that. I'm a member of Audible and I see the originals come up. So I'll be watching for Meditations with Mia Blue.
Oh, terrific. Yeah.
Great. So Gretchen, we're about out of time, and really was lovely to have you with us today. A lot of fun. And your book is a lot of fun too. The kids are going to ask. And like you said, it's mystery. It's also funny, humorous. And, at the heart, it's really about family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been really enjoyable. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for celebrating my book. It's just.
And Mom, do you have some closing words for us?
Yeah, I do. I don't want to be a spoiler, but not only do these young people find their dad, but they find themselves, because sometimes when you start out to find someone from your past, you also find yourself, your true self.
That is beautifully put.
Thank you, and see you all next week on Writers' Voices.